Wherever you live right now, someone chose that spot a long time before you. Not the house, not the street, the region, the river valley, the coastline, the patch of ground your entire ancestral line eventually settled near generation after generation until one of those generations produced you. And here's the uncomfortable part. If any single link in that chain had chosen badly, picked a spot with no water, no shelter from predators, no way to survive a bad season, that chain would have ended right there. So this is really a question about you, wearing the disguise of a question about geography. How did ancient humans, with no maps, no soil science, no understanding of climate patterns, managed to consistently pick the right patch of Earth to survive on across tens of thousands of years, across wildly different continents, again and again, well enough that it worked out for every single one of your ancestors in a row? The answer isn't guesswork. It's closer to instinct sharpened into a science, one that most of us still carry around inside us without realizing it. Here's an assumption worth naming before we go any further. The idea that ancient humans just wandered until they got tired, then settled wherever they happened to stop. That's not really how it worked, and the reason is more physical than most people expect. The human body can survive for weeks without food. Without water, that window collapses to roughly 2 to 3 days before serious organ damage begins. This single physiological fact did more to shape where humans could live than almost anything else in our early history. It meant that choosing where to live was never a lifestyle preference. It was closer to a constant, ongoing math problem run by every group, everywhere, all the time. How far can we safely be from reliable water? And what happens to us if we guess wrong? That constraint didn't just limit where people could live. It shaped how they thought about landscape itself in ways that turn out to be a lot stranger and a lot more universal than near water, please. In 1975, geographer J. Appleton published a theory that's been quietly reshaping how researchers think about human landscape preference ever since. He called it prospect refuge theory, and the core idea is almost embarrassingly simple once you hear it. Humans are drawn, instinctively and often unconsciously, to landscapes that offer both prospect and refuge at the same time. Prospect means the ability to see out, a wide open view where danger would be visible from a distance. Refuge means the ability to not be seen, a defensible spot, ideally with your back protected, where you can retreat and feel enclosed. Appleton's argument was that this preference isn't cultural, it's evolutionary residue. A slightly elevated spot near the tree line, overlooking water, with solid ground or rock at your back. That combination shows up again and again in archaeological site selection across completely unconnected cultures on different continents, long before any of those groups could have shared the idea with each other. Here's where it gets a little uncomfortable, in a good way. That exact combination, elevated, overlooking water, protected at the back, is also, almost suspiciously, the description of the most expensive real estate on the planet today. Appleton's theory has since been used by landscape architects and urban planners to explain why certain parks, certain hotel balconies, certain neighborhoods just feel right to people who couldn't begin to explain why. You've probably felt this yourself, standing somewhere with a good view and something solid behind you, without ever once thinking about predators. Your ancestors' choice of home might still be quietly running in the background of your own taste in real estate. Now here's where the story takes a turn that surprised even the researchers studying it. You'd expect early humans, given the choice, to settle in the most stable, predictable environments available: reliable food, reliable water, minimal surprises. That was the working assumption for a long time. Paleoanthropologist Richard Potts, whose research has focused heavily on the East African Rift Valley where much of early human evolution took place, proposed something that cuts against that assumption directly. His variability selection hypothesis argues that the regions where early hominins thrived weren't necessarily the most stable environments. They were often the most unpredictable ones, areas where lake levels rose and fell dramatically, where resource availability shifted unpredictably from one generation to the next, sometimes even within a single lifetime. Potts' argument is that this constant unpredictability may have been a selective pressure in its own right, favoring groups and eventually species that could adapt quickly rather than ones that were simply well-suited to one specific, stable set of conditions. In other words, some of our ancestors may not have thrived despite choosing unstable, shifting environments. They may have thrived partly because they did. It's a strange thing to sit with. We tend to imagine survival as finding the safest possible spot and staying there. Potts' research suggests that for a meaningful stretch of our evolutionary history, staying flexible mattered just as much as staying safe. Let's move forward in time to a moment where this instinct for site selection produce something we can still visit today. In the West Bank near the Jordan Valley, archaeologists have documented human settlements stretching back roughly 11,000 years around a single specific feature, a freshwater spring known today as Ain Sultan. British archaeologist Kathleen Kenyon's excavations at the site, beginning in the 1950s, the spring wasn't just convenient. In an otherwise arid region, it was the single deciding factor that made permanent settlement possible at all. Everything else about the location, the surrounding land, the climate, the terrain was frankly unremarkable. What wasn't unremarkable was a reliable year-round source of fresh water in a landscape where that was genuinely rare. This is worth sitting with for a second. An entire ancient city, one of the oldest urban settlements in human history, exists specifically because one water source happened to be located where it was. Not because of a defensible hilltop, not because of a spectacular view, not because of fertile soil in the immediate area, a spring. That single geological accident is arguably one of the most consequential site selection decisions in the story of human civilization, and nobody who benefited from it 100 generations later even knows the name of whoever first decided to stay there. This is the part of the story that deserves an honest answer rather than a triumphant one. Not every ancient settlement choice held up over time, and the reasons why are genuinely instructive. In ancient Mesopotamia, cities built along irrigated floodplains thrived for centuries by choosing locations along rivers that could support intensive agriculture. But that same irrigation, over generations, gradually raised the salt content of the soil through a process called salinization. Fields that had once been remarkably productive slowly became less and less fertile, and some archaeologists have linked the long-term decline of certain Mesopotamian city-states partly to this exact problem, a site selection that was excellent for centuries and then slowly stopped being excellent at all. Stagnant water sources brought their own quiet cost. Settlements built too close to slow-moving or standing water, chosen for the obvious convenience of proximity, sometimes paid for that convenience with disease. Nobody in the ancient world understood the mechanism, but the pattern was there to be learned the hard way, generation after generation, in exactly the kind of accumulated cultural knowledge. Stay away from that water, camp higher up, move the settlement slightly upstream. What's worth noticing here isn't that ancient humans got it wrong sometimes. That never got written down but got passed on anyway. It's that choosing where to live was never a single decision made once. It was an ongoing negotiation, constantly revised generation after generation as the consequences of earlier choices became visible, and it's stranger than it first appears. You almost certainly still respond, on some level, to the exact landscape features your ancestors were selecting for. Here's the thread that ties all of this together. The instinct that made a Rift Valley hominin favor a slightly elevated spot near water with solid rock at the back is very plausibly the same instinct that makes a modern person feel calmer looking out over a lake from a porch, or willing to pay significantly more for an apartment with an unobstructed view. We didn't invent the appeal of that landscape. We inherited the wiring for it, fully assembled from people who needed it to survive. We also inherited something less visible, the willingness to keep adjusting. Every ancient settlement that lasted more than a generation did so because the people living there kept noticing, kept adapting, kept quietly correcting course when a water source turned brackish or a hillside stopped being defensible. Richard Pott's research suggests that flexibility itself, not any single perfect location, might be the actual inheritance worth paying attention to. So the next time you find yourself drawn to a view for no reason you can quite explain, or feel unaccountably more at ease with something solid at your back, consider that you might not be having a preference. You might be remembering something carried forward, unwritten, through every single ancestor who got this particular decision right, one landscape at a time, until eventually one of them got you here. They didn't have maps, they had attention, and for 300,000 years, that turned out to be enough.